Case 1. Aaron Nicole Caffey. A family of 5. A church-going household in rural East Texas. And a 16-year-old girl who, according to prosecutors, planned the deaths of 3 members of her own family because her parents told her to end a relationship. On the morning of March 1, 2008, firefighters responding to a structure fire at a residential property in the small community of Alba, in Wood County, Texas, entered the burning structure and made 3 critical discoveries. The fire had largely consumed the Caffey family home. Inside the remains of the structure, investigators found Penny Caffey, 39 years of age, wife and mother; Matthew Caffey, 13 years of age; Tyler Caffey, 8 years of age. All 3 had died. The manner of death, initially complicated by the fire damage to the scene, was established through forensic examination. The victims had sustained fatal injuries prior to the fire being set. That finding changed everything. This was not a fire tragedy. This was a homicide investigation with an arson component designed to destroy evidence. Terry Caffey, the husband and father, survived. He had been shot multiple times but managed to reach a neighbor's property. He was transported to a medical facility. He would survive and become the prosecution's most significant witness, and simultaneously, the father of the defendant. The Texas Rangers were called in immediately. In rural Wood County, the Rangers function as a state-level investigative resource, bringing forensic and investigative capacity that small county departments cannot maintain independently. Their involvement accelerated the investigation significantly. Within days, investigators had made multiple arrests. Charles Wade, 20 years of age, was arrested. Charlie Wilkinson, 19 years of age, Aaron Caffey's boyfriend, was arrested. Bobby Johnson, 18 years of age, was arrested. And Aaron Nicole Caffey, 16 years of age, the only surviving Caffey family member who had not been at the scene during the attack, was identified as the central figure in the conspiracy. Here is what the investigation established through electronic evidence and co-defendant statements. Aaron Caffey had been in a relationship with Charlie Wilkinson. Her parents, Terry and Penny Caffey, disapproved. Wilkinson was older than Aaron, and his social media presence, specifically a MySpace page documented by investigators, contained content the Caffey parents found deeply concerning. In February of 2008, the Caffeys told Aaron the relationship had to end. When Aaron broke her phone curfew that same month, she lost her phone privileges. According to multiple witnesses, Aaron Caffey began discussing the possibility of harming her family in the weeks that followed. Text messages and phone records retrieved by the Texas Rangers established a communication trail between Aaron, Wilkinson, and Wade in the period leading up to March 1, 2008. This electronic evidence was independent of any single witness. It existed in the data record regardless of what any co-defendant said. It placed Aaron Caffey in direct communication with the individuals who carried out the attack in the days immediately preceding it. Charles Wade cooperated with the prosecution. He provided a full account of the events of March 1, 2008, how Wilkinson and Wade entered the Caffey home while Aaron Caffey and Bobby Johnson waited outside, the sequence of events inside the home, and the role he attributed to Aaron Caffey as the individual who organized and directed the conspiracy. Wade pleaded guilty to capital murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Charlie Wilkinson also pleaded guilty and received the same sentence. Bobby Johnson pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Aaron Caffey's case was certified to adult court under Texas juvenile certification procedures. She faced 3 counts of capital murder, 1 for each of the 3 family members who died. Her trial was held in Rains County District Court in 2009. The prosecution presented the electronic evidence from the Texas Rangers investigation alongside the testimony of the cooperating co-defendants. The defense presented evidence and testimony regarding Aaron Caffey's age at the time of the offense, 16 years old, her psychological profile, and the documented susceptibility of adolescents to dominant peer influence in romantic relationships. The defense did not deny the events. It sought to contextualize them within the developmental framework of adolescent decision-making. The jury heard the evidence and returned a verdict of guilty on all 3 counts of capital murder. At the penalty phase, a critical constitutional framework applied directly. In 2005, The United States Supreme Court ruled in Roper v. Simmons that the execution of individuals who were under the age of 18 at the time of their offense constitutes cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Erin Caffey was 16 at the time of the offense. She was categorically ineligible for the death penalty. The jury sentenced Erin Nicole Caffey to 3 consecutive life sentences, one for each count of capital murder, with the possibility of parole after 43 years. Terry Caffey testified during the proceedings. He later spoke publicly about the events and stated that he maintained a relationship with his daughter despite everything that had occurred. His position as the sole surviving victim and the father of the convicted defendant placed him in one of the most documented and examined victim witness roles in modern Texas criminal history. The Caffey case is studied in forensic science programs and law school curricula for 3 primary reasons. First, it demonstrates the decisive investigative power of electronic communication evidence. The text messages and phone records established a timeline that existed independently of all witness testimony. Second, it illustrates the Texas Rangers model of deploying state-level investigative capacity to rural counties, which directly determined the speed and comprehensiveness of the investigation. Third, it sits at the intersection of juvenile justice law and constitutional capital sentencing jurisprudence. The application of Roper v. Simmons in a rural Texas capital prosecution is a documented example of federal constitutional law operating within the Texas criminal framework. Erin Nicole Caffey remains incarcerated within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Case 2. Carly Madison Gregg. A home security camera was running when it happened. The footage would become the centerpiece of the entire prosecution and one of the most discussed pieces of surveillance evidence in a criminal trial in 2024. On March 19, 2024, in the city of Brandon, in Rankin County, Mississippi, 14-year-old Carly Madison Gregg shot and killed her mother, Ashley Smiley, 40 years old, a high school mathematics teacher. Within the same hour, she shot her stepfather, Heath Smiley, as he entered the home. He survived. She was taken into custody that evening, located not far from the residence after fleeing into the backyard. This is what the investigation established and what the jury saw. Earlier that day, a friend of Ashley Smiley contacted her and disclosed that Carly had been living what prosecutors described as a secret life, one that included marijuana use that her mother had not been aware of. Ashley Smiley confronted her daughter. Investigators established through the subsequent evidentiary review that the events of that afternoon unfolded within hours of that confrontation. The home security camera documented what followed. Footage shown to the jury during the trial in Rankin County Circuit Court recorded Carly Gregg moving through the family home with an object held behind her back. The object was later identified as a .357 Magnum handgun. The footage showed her pacing. It showed her approaching her mother's bedroom. It recorded the sound of 3 gunshots. Approximately 10 seconds later, the footage showed Gregg returning to the kitchen. She placed the weapon behind her back. She picked up her mother's phone from the kitchen counter. She took a seat on a stool. Her 2 dogs stood beside her. Prosecutors told the jury she then sent text messages from her mother's phone, including a message to her stepfather Heath Smiley, directing him to come home. Heath Smiley arrived. As he entered, Gregg shot him in the shoulder. He described the moment in court testimony. The firearm discharged as the door opened. He was struck before he had fully entered the home. Despite his injury, Heath Smiley was able to take the weapon from Gregg. He called 911. On the recording played for the jury, he could be heard telling the dispatcher that Gregg had shot him and killed her mother. He could be heard crying as he located Ashley Smiley's body inside the home. Law enforcement from the Rankin County Sheriff's Office responded. Mississippi Highway Patrol deployed a helicopter to assist in locating Gregg after she fled through the backyard. She was found not far from the residence and taken into custody without incident. She did not have the weapon. She had no injuries. The investigation moved quickly because the evidentiary record was already largely assembled. The security camera footage gave investigators a documented, time-stamped account of the sequence of events inside the home. The text messages sent from Ashley Smiley's phone provided a second independent layer of digital evidence. The weapon was recovered from Heath Smiley at the scene. The .357 Magnum was later confirmed as the firearm involved. During her initial court appearance, Carly Gregg entered a plea of not guilty. The Rankin County District Attorney's Office charged Gregg with first-degree murder, attempted murder of her stepfather, and tampering with evidence. The tampering charge stemming from evidence that she had concealed or interfered with the home security camera system following the shooting. Given her age, 14 at the time of the offense, the case navigated the Mississippi Juvenile Certification Framework. She was tried as an adult in Rankin County Circuit Court before Judge Dewey K. Arthur. Her trial began in September of 2024. The prosecution presented 5 days of evidence. The surveillance footage was shown to the jury in full. The 911 recording was played in open court. Deputy bodycam footage from the responding officer was presented, documenting the interior of the home as law enforcement encountered it. Heath Smiley testified from the witness stand, describing the sequence of events as he experienced them upon entering the home. Forensic and ballistic evidence was presented establishing the trajectory and the weapon used. The prosecution's central argument was one of deliberation. The footage showed planning, not impulse. The pacing, the concealed weapon, the return to the kitchen, the phone pickup, the text messages. Each action documented in sequence on the camera formed the evidentiary basis for the prosecution's position that what occurred was premeditated. The defense argued that Carly Gregg had been experiencing a mental health crisis at the time of the offense and should be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Defense attorney Kevin Camp told jurors that Gregg did not understand what she was doing at the time. The defense presented evidence and testimony regarding her psychological state in the period leading up to March 19, 2024. The prosecution countered directly. Prosecutor Catherine Newman addressed the jury and referenced a statement attributed to Gregg in the aftermath of the shooting, specifically a documented statement in which Gregg described what she had done and indicated she had additional rounds prepared for her stepfather. Newman asked the jury whether that statement was consistent with an individual who was unaware of the wrongfulness of her conduct. The jury deliberated for approximately 2 hours. On September 20, 2024, Carly Madison Gregg was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder and attempted murder convictions, plus 10 years for tampering with evidence. She was 15 years old at the time of sentencing. Following the verdict, Rankin County District Attorney Bubba Bramlett addressed the court and the public. He stated that the evidence had spoken clearly. Defense attorney Kevin Camp filed a notice of appeal to the Mississippi Supreme Court in October of 2024, arguing that new evidence had come to light that could produce a different result at a new trial and that Gregg had not received a fair and impartial proceeding. That appeal remains pending. Ashley Smiley, the victim, was 40 years old. She was a mathematics teacher. She was a mother. The case remains one of the most extensively documented juvenile parricide prosecutions in recent American criminal history, defined not by the complexity of the forensic investigation, but by the clarity of what the camera recorded and the speed with which the jury returned its verdict. Case 3. Hannah Thomas. A traffic stop in Missouri over a speeding violation. A car traveling at 111 miles per hour on an interstate highway on the night of December 29, 2020. A 17-year-old girl in the passenger seat. Her 16-year-old boyfriend behind the wheel. And a dead woman back in New York whose body had not yet been found. That traffic stop was the beginning of the end of the investigation into the death of Attilia Porras. On December 28, 2020, in the town of Greece in Monroe County, New York, Attilia Porras, 36 years old, was shot twice in the head inside the kitchen of her home on West Parkway. She died at the scene. Her body was not immediately discovered. It was only when the 2 individuals stopped in Missouri gave inconsistent accounts to the officers who pulled them over that law enforcement contacted the Greece Police Department to verify whether Porras had authorized her car to be used. When Greece police went to the West Parkway address to conduct a welfare check, they found Attilia Porras dead in her kitchen. The 2 individuals in the car in Missouri were Hannah Thomas, Attilia Porras's own daughter, 17 years old, and her boyfriend, Richard Avila, 16 years old. Both were from Arizona. Hannah Thomas had traveled to New York to visit her mother for the Christmas holiday. A ballistics analysis of the handgun recovered from the vehicle confirmed it was the weapon used in the killing. Both were arrested on the spot. Both were extradited to New York State to face charges. Here is what the investigation and subsequent court proceedings established. Hannah Thomas and Richard Avila had arrived at Otilia Parras's home for the holiday visit. Investigators determined that on December 28, 2020, inside the kitchen of the West Parkway home, Richard Avila shot Otilia Parras twice in the head. Hannah Thomas was present. Following the shooting, the pair took Parras's vehicle and drove west. They were traveling through Missouri at 111 miles per hour when a patrol officer stopped them on Interstate 44 in the town of St. Robert. During the traffic stop, Thomas and Avila gave officers varying accounts of their trip and provided false information about their circumstances. The inconsistencies prompted the officer to contact the Greece Police Department. That contact set in motion the welfare check that led to the discovery of Parras's body. The handgun in the vehicle connected the two directly to the scene. Both were charged with second-degree murder and second-degree criminal possession of a weapon. The charges were later resolved through a plea agreement. The Monroe County District Attorney's Office prosecuted the case. Assistant District Attorney Kevin Sunderland and ADA Emily Chisholm handled the proceedings. In January of 2023, more than 2 years after the killing, Hannah Thomas, by then 19 years old, pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. Richard Avila, by then 18 years old, pleaded guilty to the same charge the day prior. At the plea hearing, Assistant District Attorney Sunderland addressed the court directly. He stated that without Hannah Thomas's involvement, the crime would not have occurred. Without her participation and encouragement, he told the court, Otilia Parras would still be alive. Monroe County District Attorney Sandra Dorley issued a statement following the guilty pleas. She described the killing as a violent act of betrayal and stated that the decision made by two young people had permanently ended one life and ruined two others. Both Hannah Thomas and Richard Avila were sentenced in April of 2023 to 25 years in state prison plus 5 years of post-release supervision. The sentencing was conducted in youth part court, reflecting the age of both defendants at the time of the offense. They were ordered to serve the sentence in the New York State Department of Corrections. The case then took a significant legal turn. In 2025, the New York State Supreme Court Appellate Division 4th Department reviewed Hannah Thomas's sentence under the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, a New York statute that allows courts to reduce sentences for individuals who demonstrate that their criminal conduct was a direct result of being a victim of domestic violence. The Appellate Division determined that Thomas qualified for resentencing under the act. Her sentence was reduced to 5 years in custody plus 5 years of post-release supervision. Hannah Thomas was released from prison on July 31, 2025, having served approximately 2 years. She was 22 years old at the time of her release. Otilia Parras's mother, Hannah Thomas's own grandmother, appeared in the resentencing proceedings and asked the court to show leniency toward her granddaughter. That appeal from the victim's own family member was noted in the court's documented record of the resentencing decision. Richard Avila's sentence status remained separate from Thomas's resentencing proceedings and was not reduced under the same application. From an investigative standpoint, the Thomas case illustrates the role of routine traffic enforcement in breaking criminal cases. The Missouri traffic stop was not the product of any tip, surveillance operation, or investigative lead. It was a speeding violation. The inconsistencies the two teenagers provided to the responding officer, rather than a coordinated account, prompted the welfare check that discovered the crime. The ballistic evidence in the vehicle then provided the forensic connection between the suspects and the scene. The case also documents the prosecutorial use of the manslaughter framework in cases where the individual charged did not physically fire the weapon, but whose presence and participation formed the basis of criminal liability. The prosecution's documented position that the crime would not have occurred without Hannah Thomas's involvement was the evidentiary and legal foundation on which the guilty plea and sentence were built. Otilia Parras was 36 years old. She was a mother. She had called Greece police in the days before her death, reporting that she had not been able to reach her daughter. That call is part of the documented record. It was answered too late. Case 4, Sierra Halseth. A father's burned body discovered in his own garage. His car gone. His bank account accessed. And his 16-year-old daughter nowhere to be found. The investigation that followed moved across 2 states in 4 days and ended with a video the defendants recorded themselves. On April 9, 2021, in the Northwest Valley area of Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department officers were dispatched to a residential address following a welfare check request. Daniel Halseth, 45 years old, had not been heard from in 2 days. His mother had been unable to reach him. When officers arrived and made contact with the property, they discovered Daniel Halseth's remains in the garage of his home. His body had been set on fire. Forensic examination conducted by the Clark County Medical Examiner later established that Daniel Halseth had been stabbed 70 times before the fire was set. 3 knives, a chainsaw, a handsaw, and scissors were recovered from various locations throughout the home. Several of the items showed biological material consistent with the forensic evidence. The vehicle registered to Daniel Halseth was missing from the property. His debit card had been used after his death. Investigators identified 2 suspects within hours. The first was Sierra Halseth, Daniel's own 16-year-old daughter. The second was Aaron Guerrero, 18 years old, Sierra's boyfriend. Here is what the investigation established about the relationship and the events that preceded April 9th. Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero had been in a romantic relationship. When both sets of parents discovered that the couple was planning to run away together, they intervened. Daniel Halseth and the Guerrero family agreed that the relationship needed to end and that their children should stop seeing one another. The prohibition on the relationship became the documented point of conflict in the period leading up to the events of April 9, 2021. According to the arrest warrant and subsequent court proceedings, Sierra and Guerrero had purchased specific items prior to April 9. Surveillance footage recovered by investigators showed the pair buying tools, lighter fluid, and cleaning supplies. Those purchases, cross-referenced against the timeline of Daniel Halseth's death, formed a critical component of the prosecution's premeditation evidence. This was not an impulsive act. The procurement record documented planning. On April 13, 2021, 4 days after Daniel Halseth's body was discovered, law enforcement officers in Salt Lake City, Utah, encountered Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero after they failed to pay a light rail transit fare. They were traveling in Daniel Halseth's stolen vehicle. Both were taken into custody on open murder warrants. They were extradited to Nevada to face charges. The digital evidence assembled by investigators was extensive. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police recovered a video recorded by Guerrero on Sierra Halseth's cell phone in the days following the killing. In the video, Guerrero stated directly that 3 days had passed since the murder. Both individuals were present in the recording. Text messages recovered from the investigation documented Sierra Halseth responding to people who were attempting to locate her father. In one documented exchange, a contact asked about Daniel Halseth's whereabouts. Sierra Halseth replied that his phone had been having issues, but that he was fine and would be reachable the following day. That message was sent after her father was already dead. Both Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero were charged with murder with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree arson, robbery with a deadly weapon, and multiple counts of credit card fraud. Given Sierra Halseth's age at the time of the offense, 16, her case navigated the Nevada juvenile certification process. She was tried as an adult. In May of 2022, both Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero entered guilty pleas to the charges against them in Clark County District Court before Judge Tierra Jones. The pleas resolved the criminal proceedings without a full trial. Sentencing was conducted in October of 2022. At the sentencing hearing on October 20, 2022, members of Daniel Halseth's family addressed the court. They described the impact of his death on those who had known and loved him. Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero stood for sentencing before Judge Jones. Both were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 22 years. Sierra Halseth was 17 years old at the time of sentencing. The Halseth case is forensically significant for several documented reasons. First, the digital evidence trail, the purchasing records, the cell phone video, the text messages sent after the killing, established a premeditation record that was independent of any single witness. The defendants documented their own conduct before, during, and after the offense across multiple platforms and devices. Second, the case reflects the investigative efficiency that results when forensic financial evidence, debit card usage, and purchasing records is cross-referenced against a physical crime scene timeline. Investigators were able to establish what was purchased, when it was purchased, and how that timeline aligned with the forensic determination of Daniel Halstead's time of death. Third, the arson component of the case illustrates a recurring challenge in homicide investigations where fire has been used in an attempt to destroy physical evidence. The Clark County Medical Examiner's forensic examination of Daniel Halstead's remains was able to establish the cause and manner of death despite the fire damage, a determination that was essential to the capital nature of the charges. Daniel Halstead was a father of 3. He had sought to maintain his relationship with his children. The court record documents that he had welcomed Sierra into his home as part of a custody arrangement in the period leading up to his death. Sierra Halstead's mother, Elizabeth Halstead, is a former Nevada state senator. Her family's public profile contributed to the significant coverage the case received in Nevada and nationally. Sierra Halstead and Aaron Guerrero remain incarcerated in the Nevada Department of Corrections. Both are eligible for parole consideration after serving 22 years. Case 5. Jasmine Richardson, 12 years old. 3 family members dead. An illegal proceeding that produced the youngest conviction for multiple counts of first-degree murder in the recorded history of the Canadian criminal justice system. On April 23, 2006, in the city of Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada, the bodies of Mark Richardson, 42 years old, and Deborah Richardson, 48 years old, were discovered in the basement of their home on a quiet residential street. Their 8-year-old son Tyler was found in an upstairs bedroom. He had died from injuries consistent with a stabbing. Mark Richardson had sustained more than 24 stab wounds. Deborah Richardson had sustained 12 stab wounds. The scene was discovered the following morning when a neighbor's child went to the residence looking for his friend Tyler and observed what appeared to be a body through the window. His mother contacted police. Officers arrived, confirmed multiple fatalities, and initiated a homicide investigation. The family's 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine Richardson, was not at the residence. She was not a victim. She was a suspect. Within 24 hours, Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigators had identified Jasmine Richardson and her 23-year-old boyfriend, Jeremy Steinke, as the individuals responsible for the deaths. On April 24, 2006, both were located and arrested in the town of Leader, Saskatchewan, approximately 200 kilometers from Medicine Hat. They had been seen together at a house party in the neighborhood the night of the killings before leaving the area. Here is what the investigation established. Jasmine Richardson had met Jeremy Steinke at a punk rock concert. Steinke was 11 years older than her. He identified with a Gothic subculture and maintained an online presence in which he described himself in terms associated with a werewolf persona. Their relationship developed through online communication and in-person meetings. When Jasmine's parents, Mark and Deborah Richardson, became aware of the relationship, they forbade it. The age difference between their 12-year-old daughter and a 23-year-old man was the direct basis for their intervention. The court record established that the parental prohibition on the relationship was the documented motive for the murders. In the period preceding April 23, 2006, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke communicated through online platforms about their plans. Those communications were recovered by investigators and entered into the evidentiary record. They established that both individuals had discussed the killings in advance. The night before the murders, the pair watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers together. The forensic investigation documented the sequence of events inside the Richardson home. Physical evidence, biological evidence, and the forensic analysis of the wounds sustained by each victim were consistent with the account of premeditated entry into the residence and the deliberate targeting of each family member. The recovery of the online communications was a defining forensic development in the investigation. Digital messaging records established a documented record of planning that predated the events of April 23 by a significant period. Those records placed both Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke in direct communication about harming her family before the killings occurred. Due to Jasmine Richardson's age, 12 at the time of the offense, her identity was protected under the Youth Criminal Justice Act of Canada. She could not be publicly named in Canadian media during proceedings. Her case was prosecuted in youth court. She turned 13 before her conviction was entered. Jeremy Steinke, as an adult, was tried separately in adult court. Jasmine Richardson's trial concluded in 2007 with a verdict of guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. She became the youngest person in Canadian history ever convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder. Under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, the maximum sentence available for an offender of her age was 10 years of intensive rehabilitative custody and supervision. The sentence included 4 years in a secure psychiatric institution followed by conditional supervision in the community. The sentencing judge applied the statutory maximum. Jeremy Steinke was convicted separately in 2008 on 3 counts of first-degree murder. As an adult, he received a life sentence with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. The Richardson case engaged the Canadian legal system's framework for youth offenders at its most serious threshold. The Youth Criminal Justice Act is structured on a rehabilitative philosophy. The premise that young offenders, regardless of the severity of their conduct, retain the capacity for rehabilitation and should be sentenced within a framework that reflects both accountability and developmental potential. The 10-year maximum applied to Jasmine Richardson reflected the statutory ceiling available to the court, not a judicial determination that a lesser sentence was warranted. In 2016, having served the full term of her sentence and supervision order, Jasmine Richardson was released. She was 22 years old. Under the protections of the Youth Criminal Justice Act, she was issued a new identity. Her current name and location are not publicly known and are protected by Canadian law. The Richardson case is examined in legal and criminological curricula internationally for the questions it raises about the intersection of juvenile culpability, online radicalization, predatory adult relationships, and the sentencing frameworks available to courts when the offender is a child. The documented role of a significantly older adult in cultivating and directing the conduct of a 12-year-old is a recurring subject of academic analysis in the scholarship derived from this case. Mark Richardson, Deborah Richardson, and 8-year-old Tyler Richardson died in their home in Medicine Hat, Alberta, on April 23, 2006. The investigation that followed was completed in under 48 hours. The legal proceedings that resulted remain among the most studied in the history of Canadian criminal law. 5 daughters, 5 verdicts, 5 cases the record will never forget. If this episode gave you something, don't leave without hitting that like button, dropping a comment below, and subscribing to Cold Justice right now. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a new case. Tell us in the comments, which case stayed with you, and which state do you want us to cover next? Cold Justice. Back soon.